The film opens not with horror, but with the suffocating awkwardness of a relationship in its 10th year. Millie is a composed, driven schoolteacher who has just accepted a job in a remote rural town. Tim is a struggling musician whose career has stalled as much as his emotional growth. The tension peaks at their going-away party in Melbourne. In a desperate attempt to solidify their future, Millie proposes to Tim in front of all their friends. The room goes silent. Tim freezes, unable to say yes or no, his face a mask of paralyzed anxiety. This moment of public humiliation sets the tone. They are moving to the country not for a fresh start, but to outrun a collapse that has already happened. Upon arriving at their secluded, drafty new home, the environment reflects their internal state. The walls are thin and the ceiling is infested with rats. As Tim cleans the attic, he finds a nest of rancid, decaying rodents, which triggers a visceral, traumatic memory. As a child, Tim found his mother in bed with his father's weeks-old, decaying corpse. This establishes Tim's deep-seated fear of death and abandonment, and his psychological predisposition toward clinging to the living. Seeking to reset their connection, the couple goes for a hike in the dense woods surrounding their property. A sudden, violent rainstorm forces them into a hidden underground crevasse. The interior of the cave is unsettling, filled with strange, ancient religious iconography and symbols of wholeness. Dehydrated and desperate, Tim ignores every instinct and drinks stagnant, glowing water from a murky pool. Millie refuses. They fall into a heavy, unnatural sleep. When they wake, their legs are covered in a thin, translucent slime and are physically stuck together at the thigh. They peel themselves apart with a sickening, wet sound, a small preview of what is to come, and dismiss it as a strange reaction to the cave's environment. The horror becomes undeniable once they return home. Tim begins to experience magnetic episodes. As Millie drives to her first day of school, Tim is suddenly jerked toward the door, as if pulled by an invisible winch. In a standout sequence of slapstick horror, the distance between them becomes a physical weapon. As Millie drives further away, Tim is dragged across the floorboards, his body slamming into furniture and walls. His limbs contort at impossible angles, desperate to maintain a tether to Millie. He eventually realizes that if she takes a sharp turn in the car, his body in the house lurches in synchronization. He is no longer an individual, he is a satellite orbiting her existence. Millie, unaware of the severity of Tim's condition, finds comfort in her new coworker, Jamie. Jamie is unnervingly calm and offers her water from a similarly ornate pitcher. He recites the theory from Plato's Symposium that humans were originally four-legged, four-armed beings with two heads, split in half by Zeus. He tells her that searching for your other half isn't a metaphor, it's a biological necessity. Jamie's house is filled with bells and symbols of the union, suggesting that the town itself is a breeding ground for this transformation. Tim, terrified of being alone, tracks Millie to her school, his body vibrating with the need to be near her. They retreat into a narrow bathroom stall to argue, but the argument turns into a frantic, fearful sexual encounter. The film shifts into pure body horror here. As they climax, their flesh begins to soften and liquefy. When they try to stand up, they realize they have fused together at the genitals. The scene is a harrowing display of pain and desperation as they have to rip themselves apart. The sound design is excruciating. The sound of tearing skin and snapping sinew emphasizes that their bodies are now fighting their desire for autonomy. During a night of intense attraction, Tim and Millie are forced together in their sleep. They wake to find their arms have completely knitted together into a single seamless mass of muscle and bone. Tim is catatonic, but Millie, realizing she is losing her very self, enters a state of survivalist mania. She retrieves an electric buzzsaw from the garage. In a scene of unflinching gore, she pins their conjoined arm to a workbench. As Tim screams, Millie saws through the center of the fusion. The screen goes black as the blade hits bone, leaving the audience with the image of a couple who would rather mutilate themselves than be truly together. The screen flickers back to life in the grimy garage. The floor is slick with blood. Millie has successfully sawed through the fused limb, a brutal act of willpower that has left both her and Tim in shock. They are now physically separate, but the magnetic pull hasn't vanished. It has only become more violent, causing their fresh wounds to throb in synchronization. Millie realizes they need a hospital immediately, but in her mania, she has lost the car keys. She remembers leaving them at the house of their neighbor, Jamie. Bleeding and trembling, she instructs Tim to stay put while she stumbles next door. Tim, however, is driven by a dark curiosity and a theory that the missing couple, Simon and Carrie, hold the secret to their condition. He heads back toward the forest, clutching his bandaged stump. Tim reaches the underground crevasse. The atmosphere inside is heavy, smelling of copper and wet earth. Using a flickering flashlight, he explores the deeper reaches of the church ruins. He finds the missing couple, but they are no longer two people. In the film's most terrifying practical effects sequence, Tim discovers a monstrous, multi-limbed hybrid. Simon and Carrie attempted to resist the fusion. As a result, the process stalled in a state of agony. Simon is dead, his head slumped and rotting, while Carrie is still biologically attached to him, her eyes wide open and pleading, trapped in a half-formed shell of fused muscle. Tim realizes with horror that the stagnant water wasn't a poison, it was an invitation. To resist the fusion is to become a living tomb. Simultaneously, Millie enters Jamie's house. It is eerily silent. She finds the living room bathed in the blue light of a television. An old VHS tape is playing a wedding video of two men she doesn't recognize. The video transitions from a standard ceremony into a gruesome, ritualistic event. The two men slice their own wrists and press the wounds together, while a congregation rings bells and chants. On the tape, their flesh begins to crawl and knit together. Millie watches with revulsion as the two men literally dissolve into each other, forming a single person, Jamie. She realizes that Jamie is not a man, but a result, a successful fusion who has maintained his sanity by embracing the change. Jamie appears behind Millie, his voice calm and paternal. He explains that modern individuality is a sickness of the soul, and that Tim and Millie were chosen because of their existing toxic codependency. He tells her that Tim is already drinking from the source, and that she must accept her fate. When Millie refuses and tries to flee, Jamie's demeanor shifts. He isn't a villain in his own mind, he is a savior. He produces a ceremonial blade and slices Millie's arm, mirroring the ritual on the tape. He tells her that the magnetic attraction will now be absolute because she is open to him. Millie manages to strike him with a heavy object and stumbles out into the night, her blood marking a trail back to her driveway. Millie collapses in the driveway just as Tim emerges from the woods. Tim is hysterical, describing the creature he saw in the cave. He sees Millie's deep ritualistic wound and realizes she is bleeding out. He brandishes a knife, initially planning to kill himself to break the tether and save her from the mutation. However, as they lock eyes, the metaphor of their 10-year relationship reaches its conclusion. Tim admits he doesn't know how to exist without her, and Millie, fading from blood loss, realizes she can no longer fight the pull. In a final act of desperate, terrifying love, Tim discards the knife. He presses his own amputated raw stump directly into Millie's open wound, allowing their circulatory systems to instantly lock and merge. The film shifts into a surreal, high-saturation visual style. They move inside the house, their bodies already beginning to melt into each other. Tim places the needle on a record player, and the Spice Girls' Two Become One begins to play. They slow dance in the living room as their clothes are absorbed into their softening skin. The camera captures the body horror with a strange, hypnotic beauty. Their rib cages interlock like gears, and their facial features begin to slide and shift across their skulls. By the end of the song, they have collapsed into a single pulsing mass on the floor, the two separate entities of Tim and Millie officially gone. The film jumps forward 1 week. The house is pristine, the rot seemingly gone. A car pulls up, it's Millie's parents, arriving for the lunch that has been teased throughout the movie. They knock on the door, expressing concern that they haven't heard from the couple.